The following episode contains material that may be uncomfortable, upsetting, and unsuitable for some audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we journey to Rawlins, Wyoming, a place where wide skies meet harsh history, to explore a mansion that stands as a silent witness to ambition, grief, and something that may have never fully let go. A place where history and the supernatural intertwine. This is the story of the Ferris Mansion, a Queen Anne-style Victorian home built at the 20th century. The Ferris Mansion has stood for over 100 years. Through booms and busts, joy and devastating loss, it has watched generations pass through its rooms, and some, many believe, have never truly left. Welcome to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where the world of true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Every Tuesday, a deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators and the eerie places where dark stories still linger. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube so you never miss an episode. Today, we'll be exploring not only the rise and fall of the Ferris family, but the lingering presence that continues to echo throughout their grand home. The story begins far from Wyoming in Eaton Rapids, Michigan. George Ferris was born on January 21st, 1840. He grew up modestly, surrounded by farmland and open roads, developing a love for horseback riding and independence, traits that would serve him well later in life. When the Civil War broke out on April 12, 1861, George was not on the front lines of conflict, but like many young men of his time, he felt a pull to serve. Sitting idle was just not an option for him. He needed to contribute. In 1862, he enlisted in the Union Cavalry. He entered as a corporal, and in less than a year, earned the promotion to sergeant, a sign of both discipline and leadership. When the war ended, George returned home, changed, like so many others. By October of 1865, his military service was over. What came next was the great question facing countless men of the late 19th century. Where do you go when the world feels too small? For George, the answer lay west. Wyoming in the late 1800s was not polished or predictable. Rawlins was a railroad town carved out of dust, wind, and opportunity. Fortunes were made quickly, but lost just as fast. Saloons outnumbered churches, winters were brutal, the land demanded resilience. But for men like Ferris, the frontier wasn't chaos. It was possibility. George found his fortune in copper. The Rudafea mine, later renamed the Ferris Haggerty Mine, was one of the richest copper deposits in what would become the Grand Encampment Mining District. The mine played a pivotal role in the economic development of south central Wyoming, feeding the region's growing demand for industrial metals. Now, mining wasn't just dangerous, it was exhausting and isolating. Workers endured freezing temperatures, avalanches, collapsing tunnels, and lung-ravaging dust. Yet, the promise of copper riches drove hundreds of men to the Rudafea claim. Ferris, well aware of the risks, but also knowing of the rewards, he oversaw his operations personally, from both the business side and the engineering side. Sometimes he even descended into the shafts himself. To many, George Ferris wasn't just a businessman. He was a visionary trying to build permanence in a transient land. He bought land in Rawlins. He made connections with Eastern financiers and talked of bringing culture, refinement, and stability to the High Plains. At the center of that vision was a house. Not just a simple anywhere home, but a mansion, a declaration that Rawlins was no longer temporary, a declaration that the Ferris family had arrived. The Ferris Mansion is more than just a house, more than just a mansion. It's a statement. Its design came from the catalog of George F. Barber, a prominent American architect whose firm Barber and Klutz specialized in mail order house plans, elaborate Victorian dream homes for the aspirational American family to display their success and taste. The Ferris Mansion is a textbook example of Queen Anne architecture, an eclectic style defined by asymmetrical lines, ornate gables, bay windows, intricate woodwork, and most strikingly, a commanding turret. In Wyoming, where most buildings of the era were simple and functional, the Ferris Mansion stood out like a palace on the prairie. Victorian homes weren't just built for comfort, they were built to communicate identity, and every detail was intentional. The asymmetry symbolized individualism, while the craftsmanship spoke of wealth and permanence. The turret, rising above the town, symbolized a watchful presence, almost like a lighthouse surveying the frontier. Inside, Julia Ferris ensured the home reflected East Coast refinement. Pocket doors, gaslight fixtures, silk wallpaper, imported carpets, a parlor designed for entertaining, complete with a piano and pressed tin ceiling. Upstairs, the rooms were laid out to reflect Victorian ideals, separate spaces for women, children, and servants. This was not simply a residence, it was a legacy built from brick and wood. But George Ferris, unfortunately, would never see it finished. In 1900, the same year that George Ferris finalized the sale of the Ferris Haggerty mine, tragedy struck. While traveling home from the mine, George was thrown from a runaway carriage on Snowslide Hill. He was thrown into the brake beam, suffering fatal injuries. He died before the mansion was complete. A man who spent his life building towards permanence never lived to see his greatest symbol of it finished. Julia Ferris was suddenly widowed, left with children, a half finished mansion, and a town watching closely. And yet, she persevered. Against expectation and hardship, Julia oversaw the completion of the mansion in 1903. She raised her children within its walls, determined that the home would still stand for dignity and stability, even if the cost was personal. Widowhood in the early 1900s was not gentle. Julia Ferris inherited responsibilities that would have overwhelmed many women at the time. They weren't used to managing finances, maintaining social standing, and raising children in a town where reputation mattered deeply. Neighbors described her as a graceful but firm. She attended church without fail and donated to local causes around Rawlins. She organized ladies' luncheons, and according to one account, she once even hosted the governor's wife for tea. But behind the lace curtains and public demeanor, there was grief. Some said she rarely smiled after George's death. Others remember her as fiercely protective of her children, particularly after the next tragedy struck. Planning a vacation should be just as fun as taking one, and that's where my friend Renee comes in. Renee Monty from Magical Travels by Monty is a professional travel advisor who takes the stress out of planning so you can focus more on making memories. Renee can book any type of travel, but specializes in Orlando destinations like Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando, as well as cruise vacations for every style and budget. From expert tips to personal touches, Renee will make sure your trip is truly magical. Best of all, her services are completely free to you. Renee is actually paid directly by the vendors after your travel. So you get expert planning, insider tips, and personal service without paying one penny extra. So, what are we waiting for? Let's start planning your next adventure. Email Renee at magicaltravelsbymonty, that is MONTY, at gmail.com. In 1904, just 1 year after the Ferris family moved into the mansion, disaster returned. It was a cold night, the kind when the wind outside whistled like a warning. The youngest Ferris child, Cecil, only 9 years old, was playing in the parlor, a grand room just off the main hallway known for its elaborate fireplace and hand carved furnishings. Julia stepped away, just for a moment, to tend to guests in the dining room. Cecil then made his way to his brother's bedroom, and just as he happened to be passing through the door of the bedroom where his brothers were playing with a gun, it went off, accidentally shooting Cecil in the neck. He died instantly. The accident occurred within the home, a space to symbolize safety, success, and permanence. Cecil had been known, by all accounts, as a bright, imaginative child, energetic, curious, the kind of boy who explored every corner of the world around him and would have felt more at home on the pages of a Mark Twain novel rather than in the confinement of high society. The Ferris family never recovered. Julia withdrew from public life, her presence becoming a shadow of the woman she once was. The mansion also changed. The music faded, guests stopped coming by, and locals say that even now, the parlor where Cecil was often seen playing holds a chill that no fire can warm. Some claim to hear the echo of a child's laughter. There are those who believe young Cecil never truly left the home, that in the stillest hours of the night, when the house creaks with memory, the boy who once played in the parlor still comes out. The Ferris Mansion remains one of Rawlins' most talked about landmarks, not just for its beauty, but for the shadows it carries. And among those shadows, the faint echo of a boy whose life ended too soon. Like so many grand American dreams, the Ferris fortune did not last. By the 1910s, economic shifts swept through Wyoming. The cattle boom waned, and financial pressures mounted. Without George, and with Julia increasingly reclusive, the mansion began to suffer. Paint peeled, pipes froze, curtains faded. The very features that once showcased elegance became burdens too costly to maintain. Through the 1930s and 40s, the house changed hands repeatedly. Each new owner saw potential, but lacked either the means or the commitment to restore it. Some attempted to modernize it, stripping away its character in the process. Others simply abandoned it altogether. At one point, it was used as a boarding house. Cheap rooms, flickering lights, and a strange energy that unsettled even the bravest of tenants. It was during these years that the stories began to circulate. Cold spots, footsteps, unexplained noises, and a presence that seemed to linger just beyond sight. By the 1960s, the once grand Ferris Mansion had become, in the eyes of many locals, a haunted relic. A place children dared each other to approach on Halloween night. A house where echoes of better days seemed to haunt every corner. It was during these decades that the mansion became something more than just a decaying house. It became a symbol of fragile success and the weight of memory and of loss. The elegance was still there if you knew where to look, but it was buried beneath years of neglect and sorrow. And yet, as Rawlins grew and changed around it, the mansion endured, watching, waiting, holding on to its secrets. A beautiful ruin teetering between history and myth. With so much grief layered into one place, it's no wonder the Ferris Mansion is considered one of the most haunted locations in Wyoming. Unlike violent sites, the Ferris Mansion's ghosts are quieter, sadder. The Paranormal Hunting and Observation Group investigated the mansion multiple times. During one of their visits, motion sensors placed in Cecil's former bedroom were triggered overnight, despite the room being locked. Their EVP recordings captured faint music, an old lullaby, followed by a woman's voice whispering, "Cecil, it's time for bed." Some believe Julia still searches for her lost son, her spirit unwilling to move on until he was found. Others believe the house itself remembers. Now, history leaves behind more than just bricks and blueprints. Sometimes it leaves echoes, whispers, feelings. And in the case of the Ferris Mansion, it leaves stories, unsettling, personal, and curiously consistent. Because while the Ferris Mansion has been lovingly restored in recent decades, its past is never too far beneath the surface. And if you ask those who have walked its halls, stayed overnight, or simply stood at the threshold after dark, they'll tell you something lingers. These aren't stories pulled from ghost hunting TV specials or horror novels. These are firsthand accounts from real people who've experienced the unexplained inside those red brick walls. A local historian once described cataloging furniture in the parlor late one afternoon. The sun was setting, and I remember the light hitting the stained glass just right. It was beautiful. Then suddenly I felt it, like someone behind me. You know that sensation? Not just a presence, but weight. I turned, and of course, no one was there, but the air had gone completely cold. The hairs on my arms stood up. I don't scare easily, but I left the house early that day. She isn't alone. One visitor, a traveling nurse from Colorado, described waking in the middle of the night to the sound of a child humming a lullaby. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. She didn't stay the second night. Another guest claimed she saw the imprint of someone sitting on the edge of her bed, just a faint dip in the blanket. It vanished the moment she flipped the light on. Not every story is frightening. Some are strangely tender. There's the tale of the couple who renewed their vows in the drawing room. The bride swore she felt what she described as a warmth during the ceremony, like the house was approving. Later in their photos, a soft white blur appeared near her shoulder. They believe it was Julia Ferris watching over them. Former residents who lived in the home in the 1980s said that we used to hear a marble rolling across the floor at night. Just one, rolling slowly across the wood, then stopping. I went to look more than once. Nothing. No marble, no one in the hallway. But always around the same time, 1:45 in the morning. Now, skeptics will tell you it's drafty windows, creaky floorboards, the power of suggestion. And maybe they're right. Maybe. But the Ferris Mansion holds more than architecture and antiques. It holds memory. It holds emotion. A timeline of joy, grief, and everything in between. When enough emotion soaks into a place, who's to say what remains? Now, whether you believe in ghosts or not, the stories are real. The people telling them felt something. And in a house as storied as this, maybe the unexplained is just another kind of history, a history that refuses to be forgotten. After decades of decline, it was a couple named Carla and Dale Wagner who took a leap of faith. In the late 1990s, they purchased the crumbling mansion, sight unseen, and what they found was more than a challenge. They found a calling. They painstakingly peeled back years of neglect, sanding original woodwork by hand, restoring stained glass, salvaging antiques, matching missing architectural elements using historical photographs, and where they couldn't preserve, they replicated. Where they could, they honored the past. Their work transformed the Ferris Mansion from a forgotten relic into a beautiful boutique bed and breakfast. Guests slept in rooms named after members of the Ferris family. Mornings began with fresh coffee and homemade scones. Evenings may have included stories by the fireplace or quiet moments spent watching the light filter through century old windows. But today, the Ferris Mansion is privately owned and no longer operates as a bed and breakfast. When I looked it up, it actually said that it was permanently closed. But if you find yourself passing through Rawlins, take a walk past 607 West Spruce. You'll find the Ferris Mansion still standing proudly, its deep red brick restored, its towers intact, its lace trim catching the sunlight just like it did over a century ago. Time has worn on, but it hasn't necessarily worn through. So, why do we tell ghost stories? Maybe because we need to. Ghosts aren't always frightening. Sometimes they're the echoes of grief that never found release, love that lingered a little too long, memories soaked into walls. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, architecture, and the unseen. The Ferris Mansion reminds us that the past is never fully gone. It lives in the spaces we preserve, the stories we tell, and the echoes we sometimes hear when the night is quiet. With that, I will see you the next bump in the night. You've been listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, the podcast where the world of true crime meets the paranormal. I'm your host, Cassiopeia. Join me every Tuesday as I deep dive into chilling cases that have baffled investigators and the eerie places where dark stories still linger. If you can't get enough of these creepy tales, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, where you can access exclusive content, early episode releases, and bonus material that'll make you sleep with one eye open. You can also grab some Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces merchandise to keep the spookiness close, whether it's a mug for your morning coffee or a hoodie to wrap yourself in on those cold, stormy nights. If you love what you hear, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tell your friends and give a rating to help with that pesky algorithm. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, keep your lights on because you never know what might be lurking in the dark.